The pristine silence of the savannah morning was shattered not by a sound, but by a touch. It was a grip, frantic and desperate, from small fingers that felt like ice against the warmth of my cashmere cardigan. "Grandma, please, do not get in the machine. It screams fire." The whisper was so faint it barely registered above the humidity of the Georgia air, but the terror in my grandson's eyes was loud enough to stop my heart. Leo, barely 8 years old, looked at me with a haunted expression that no child should ever possess. He was trembling, his little chest heaving as if he had run a marathon just to reach me at the front door. I froze, my hand hovering halfway to the ornate brass handle of the front entrance. I looked down at him, confused, my mind still cycling through the itinerary of board meetings and supply chain logistics that usually consumed my mornings. "What are you saying, Leo?" I asked, dropping to one knee to meet his gaze. My joints protested, a reminder of my 68 years, but I ignored the ache. He leaned in closer, the scent of his strawberry toothpaste mixing with the smell of fear that seemed to radiate from his pores. He looked over his shoulder, checking the empty hallway where the portraits of our ancestors stared down in judgment, before pressing his lips almost against my ear. "They said the black car will go boom. They said Mommy gave the order to make it burn." The world tilted on its axis. For a moment, the grand foyer of Blackwood Manor, with its checkered marble floors and sweeping staircase, dissolved into a blur of vertigo. I gripped Leo's shoulders, feeling the fragile bones beneath his pajamas. "Who said that, Leo? Who?" But before he could answer, the sharp click of heels echoed from the dining room. Leo flinched violently, his eyes widening in panic. He pulled away from me, retreating into the shadows of the coat rack just as my daughter-in-law, Camilla, emerged into the hallway. She was a vision of curated perfection, as she always was. Her silk blouse was unwrinkled, her blonde hair swept back in a chignon that defied gravity, and her smile was a weapon she wielded with expert precision. "Eleanor, darling, you're still here? I thought you would be halfway to the port by now." Her voice was smooth, like molasses laced with arsenic. I slowly stood up, smoothing the front of my skirt, fighting the urge to look at the terrified child hiding mere feet away. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a drumbeat of pure adrenaline. "I just realized I forgot my reading glasses upstairs." I lied, my voice surprising me with its steadiness. Years of negotiating with ruthless shipping magnates had given me a poker face that could withstand even this. Camilla's blue eyes scanned my face, searching for a crack in the armor. For a split second, the mask slipped, and I saw a flash of cold calculation, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by her standard veneer of solicitous concern. "Oh, let me get them for you. You shouldn't be climbing the stairs in those heels." "No," I interrupted, perhaps a little too sharply. I forced a smile. "I need to check something in my study anyway. Is Julian up?" "He's in the breakfast nook, absorbed in his tablet, as usual. You know how your son gets when the market opens." She stepped closer, reaching out to adjust the collar of my jacket. Her touch was light, but it made my skin crawl. I had to summon every ounce of willpower not to recoil. "You look tired, Eleanor. Are you sure you're up for a full day at the office? Maybe you should take the day off. Stay home. Rest." The suggestion hung in the air, heavy with double meaning. If I stayed home, I wouldn't be in the car. Was she having second thoughts? Or was she just playing with her food before she ate it? "I'm fine, Camilla. Just a restless night." I walked past her, my heels clicking on the marble, each step a testament to a composure I did not feel. I entered the dining room, where the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Julian, my son, my only child, sat at the head of the table. He was a soft man, in both body and spirit. He had his father's dark eyes, but none of his fire. Arthur, my late husband, had been a force of nature, a man who built Vance Logistics from a single truck into a global empire. Julian was content to live in the castle Arthur built, letting the walls protect him from the harshness of the world. He looked up as I entered, offering a vague, distracted smile. "Morning, Mother. Camilla said you were running late." I walked over and kissed his forehead, a ritual I had performed every day of his life. His skin was warm, smelling of expensive aftershave and coffee. I looked at him, really looked at him, searching for any sign that he knew. Could he be part of this? The thought was a physical blow. My Julian, who used to bring me injured birds to nurse back to health. No, he was weak, perhaps, and easily led, but he was not a monster. "I'm just heading out," I said, my hand lingering on his shoulder. "Julian, I love you. You know that, right?" He blinked, surprised by the intensity of my tone. "Of course, Mom. I love you too. Is everything okay?" "Everything is fine," I lied again. I turned and saw Leo sitting on the floor in the corner, methodically stacking Lego bricks. He wasn't playing, he was building a wall, brick by brick, shutting out the world. He didn't look up as I passed, but I saw his small hands trembling. I walked to the front door, grabbed my purse, and stepped out onto the porch. The heat of the Georgia morning hit me instantly, thick and oppressive. My car, a sleek black sedan, sat in the driveway, gleaming under the sunlight. It looked like a predator waiting to pounce. Usually, Kalen, our driver and head of security, would be holding the door open, but he was standing a few feet away, talking on his cell phone, his back to me. He turned when he heard the door close, and for a brief moment I saw a look of annoyance cross his face before he masked it with professional deference. "Mrs. Vance, good morning. I have the car cooled down for you." Kalen had been with us for 5 years. Camilla had hired him. She claimed he was the best, a former military contractor with impeccable references. I had trusted her judgment. Now, looking at the car, I felt a wave of nausea. I stared at the vehicle. It was a beautiful machine, German engineering at its finest. But through Leo's words, I saw it differently. I saw the wires, the hidden explosives, the fire that would consume everything I was. "Actually, Kalen," I said, stopping at the top of the stairs, "I don't feel like being driven today. I have a headache, and I'd prefer to take a quiet taxi ride to clear my mind. I want to review some papers without the distraction of conversation." Kalen froze. His hand was already reaching for the handle of the black sedan. He hesitated, his eyes darting to the car and then back to me. "But Mrs. Vance, it's unsafe. The protocols." I raised a hand, silencing him. It was the gesture I used in boardrooms to shut down multi-million-dollar bad ideas. "My headache is not a matter for protocol, Kalen. Please call a taxi, or better yet, I'll use the app. You can have the morning off." I didn't wait for his response. I pulled out my phone, my fingers shaking as I opened the rideshare app. I could feel Kalen's eyes boring into me, assessing, calculating. Was I suspicious? Or just an eccentric old woman having a whim? While I waited for the taxi, the front door opened again. Camilla stepped out holding a travel mug. "Mom? Kalen says you're not taking the car?" I turned to face her. The sun was behind her, creating a halo that looked disturbingly angelic. "No, dear. Just a change of pace." Camilla's smile didn't falter, but the skin around her eyes tightened. "That's silly. Kalen is ready. Why wait for a stranger?" I ignored her, watching the map on my phone as the little car icon approached. I turned back to the house. "Leo, sweetie, come here!" Leo appeared in the doorway, clutching a red Lego brick. "Grandma is going to take you to school today. In a taxi. It'll be an adventure." Camilla stepped forward, her voice dropping an octave. "He takes the bus, Eleanor. You know that. It's part of his routine. Today is special," I said firmly, extending my hand to Leo. He dropped the brick and ran to me, burying his face in my skirt. I felt him sobbing silently. The taxi, a battered yellow sedan that had seen better days, pulled up the long driveway. I ushered Leo into the back seat and climbed in beside him, slamming the door shut. I didn't look back at Camilla or Kalen. I didn't want them to see the terror I knew was written all over my face. "Drive," I told the driver. "Just drive." As the taxi rolled down the oak-lined avenue, away from the estate, I let out a breath I felt I had been holding since I woke up. I pulled Leo onto my lap, wrapping my arms around him, rocking him gently. "It's okay," I whispered into his hair. "We're safe. We're safe." But I knew we weren't. Not really. When we were a few miles away, parked in the drop-off lane of his private school, I turned Leo's face toward mine. His eyes were red-rimmed, his lower lip trembling. "Leo, look at me. You are the bravest boy I know. But I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Everything. Every word." He took a shuddering breath, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "I was up early. I wanted to get the new Lego set from the playroom. I went through the garden because the floorboards in the hall squeak, and I didn't want to wake Daddy." He paused, looking down at his hands. "I was behind the hedges, near the garage. Kalen was there. He was on the phone. He was speaking that language he speaks sometimes, the one you said is from his old country." "Russian?" I asked gently. Leo nodded, but then he switched to English when Mommy walked in. She was wearing her running clothes. She asked him if it was done. I felt a cold chill spread through my veins. "And what did Kalen say?" "He said the package is under the seat, wired to the ignition. One turn of the key and poof." Leo made an exploding motion with his hands, and my stomach turned over. "And then Mommy." She laughed. She said, "Good, the old witch needs to fly away." Tears streamed down my face. The old witch. Is that what I was to her, after I welcomed her into my home? After I paid off her father's debts so she could enter our society without shame? After I gave her the keys to the kingdom? Leo looked at me, panic rising in his eyes again. "Grandma, are you mad at me?" "No, oh no, darling. Never at you." I hugged him so tight I was afraid I might hurt him. "You saved my life, Leo. You are my hero." I sent him into school with a promise that I would pick him up myself, that I would be there waiting. Watching him walk away, his small backpack looking so heavy on his shoulders, I felt a surge of rage so powerful it almost blinded me. I did not go to the office. Instead, I gave the taxi driver a new address. It was in the historic district, a dusty street lined with antique shops and law offices. I needed someone who operated outside the shiny, polished world of Vance Logistics. I needed Elias Thorne. Elias had been Arthur's fixer in the early days, back when the unions were run by mobsters and business was done with a handshake and a baseball bat. He was old now, like me, but his mind was a steel trap. His office smelled of stale tobacco and old paper. He was sitting behind a desk that looked like it had survived a war, nursing a cup of black coffee. When I walked in, he didn't look surprised. He just gestured to the chair opposite him. "Eleanor Vance. To what do I owe the pleasure? You usually send your lawyers to bark at me." I sat down, placing my handbag on the floor. I didn't have time for banter. "Someone is trying to kill me, Elias. And I think it's my daughter-in-law." Elias stopped midway through a sip of coffee. He set the mug down slowly, his eyes, dark and intelligent, locked onto mine. "Start from the beginning," he said. I told him everything. The whisper in the hallway, the strange behavior of the driver, the conversation Leo overheard. As I spoke, the reality of it settled in, heavy and undeniable. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a coup. When I finished, Elias leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. "Camilla. That's the blonde from the Hamptons, right? The one with the expensive taste and no family money? That's her. And Kalen? The driver. Ex-military. Or so she says." Elias nodded, reaching for a notepad. "I'll make some calls. I have a contact who can run a deeper background check on Kalen than whatever agency you used, and I'll get a team on your house. We need to verify the car." He looked at me seriously. "You can't go back there, Eleanor. It's not safe." "I have to," I said, my voice hardening. "If I don't go back, they'll know I know. They'll panic. They might hurt Julian. Or Leo. I have to play the game, Elias. I have to be the oblivious old widow until we have enough to bury them." Elias sighed, rubbing his temples. "You were always stubborn. Just like Arthur. Fine. But don't get in that car, and don't eat anything she prepares." I left his office with a burner phone and a sense of grim purpose. I was no longer a victim. I was a hunter. I returned to Blackwood Manor in the early afternoon, taking a taxi to the service entrance. I slipped into the gardens, moving through the shadows of the magnolia trees. The estate was quiet, the staff likely on their break. I found Silas, our head gardener, in the potting shed. Silas was as much a part of the land as the oak trees. He had taught Julian to fish, taught Leo to identify birds. He was loyal to the bone. "Silas," I whispered. He jumped, nearly dropping a clay pot. "Mrs. Vance, you nearly gave me a heart attack. Why are you sneaking around like a fox in the henhouse?" I put a finger to my lips. "I need you to do something for me, Silas, and you can't ask me why." "Not yet." He looked at my face, seeing the fear and the resolve. He wiped his hands on his apron and nodded. "Anything, Mrs. Vance." "I need you to look at my car. Underneath the driver's seat. Tell me if you see anything unnatural." We crept to the garage. The side door was unlocked. The black sedan sat there in the dim light. Silas lay on the cold concrete, sliding under the chassis with a groan of effort. The silence stretched for an eternity. I could hear the distant hum of the pool filter and the pounding of my own heart. Finally, Silas slid back out. His face, usually ruddy from the sun, was gray. "Mrs. Vance," he whispered, his voice shaking. "There's a box. Black plastic. Magnets holding it to the frame. Wires going up into the engine block. It looks like something from the movies." I closed my eyes, a single tear escaping. It was real. It was all real. "Can you take a picture?" I asked. Silas nodded. He pulled out his battered smartphone and snapped several photos, his hands trembling. He sent them to the number Elias had given me. "Now, Silas, listen to me. You saw nothing. You were never here. Go back to the hydrangeas. If anyone asks, you haven't seen me all day." He grabbed my hand, his grip rough and calloused. "Mrs. Vance, we should call the police. Right now." "Not yet," I said. "I need to know how deep the rot goes." For the next 3 days, I lived in a theater of the absurd. I went to work, taking taxis, claiming my car was bad luck or that I wanted to support the local gig economy. I sat at dinner across from Camilla, complimenting her roast chicken, asking about her charity auctions, all while visualizing a noose tightening around her neck. Camilla was growing restless. I could see it in the way she tapped her nails on the wine glass, the way her eyes narrowed when I mentioned new long-term projects for the company. She was waiting for the explosion, and the silence was driving her mad. Julian remained oblivious, lost in his blueprints and his daydreams. I looked at him with a mixture of pity and anger. How could he not see the viper in his bed? Or did he choose not to see? On the third night, my burner phone buzzed. It was a text from Elias. "Meet me, usual place, I have the video." I met him at a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of the city. The neon sign flickered, casting a sickly green light over the booth. Elias had his laptop open. "Watch this," he said without preamble. The video was grainy, taken from a distance, likely with a telephoto lens. It showed an alleyway behind a dive bar in the Port District. Kalen walked into the frame. He was met by a thin, nervous-looking man in a hoodie. They exchanged words, and then Kalen handed him a thick envelope. The man handed Kalen a small, black device. Elias paused the video. "That device look familiar?" "It was the box from under my car." "The guy in the hoodie is a known bomb maker for the cartels down in Florida," Elias explained. "We have Kalen purchasing the device. We have the financial trail, too." Camilla withdrew $10,000 in cash from a Shell account 3 days ago. I stared at the screen. It was enough. It was enough to send them both to prison for the rest of their lives. "But why?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Why kill the goose that lays the golden eggs?" Elias tapped a key, bringing up a document. "Because the goose was about to change the will." I frowned. "What?" "Camilla has been meeting with your estate lawyers, impersonating you on the phone. She thinks you're planning to put the majority of the assets into a trust for Leo, bypassing Julian and by extension, her until Leo turns 25. I gasped. I was planning that, but I hadn't told a soul. How did she know? "She has bugged your office, Eleanor. She's been listening to your dictations." The violation felt physical. She had been inside my head, anticipating my moves, plotting my death to secure a fortune she hadn't earned. "Go to the police," Elias said. "We have everything." "Not yet," I said again. "I need one more thing. I need to hear her say it. I need Julian to hear her say it." That night, insomnia was my only companion. I wandered the house like a ghost in my own life. The moonlight turned the familiar hallways into a landscape of silver and shadow. I stepped out onto the terrace overlooking the pool. The air was heavy with the scent of jasmine. I was about to turn back inside when I heard a low, urgent hiss of voices from the garden below. I crept to the edge of the stone balustrade, peering down through the ivy. Two figures stood by the pool house, Camilla and Kaylin. "Why isn't she using the car?" Camilla's voice was a jagged shard of glass. "It's been 3 days, Kaylin." "She's suspicious," Kaylin replied, his voice gruff. "She's acting strange, taking taxis, talking to the gardener. I think she knows." Camilla paced, her silk robe fluttering. "She can't know. She's senile. She's just being difficult." "If she finds the device, we are finished," Kaylin warned. "We need to retrieve it." "No," Camilla snapped. "Too risky to go back into the garage now. We need a plan B." I held my breath, my hand clutching the cold stone railing. I pulled out my phone, hitting record. "What kind of plan B?" Kaylin asked. "Make it look like an accident," Camilla said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "She walks by the cliffs every Sunday morning. A slip. A fall. The elderly have poor balance. It happens all the time." "And the boy?" Kaylin asked. "He's always with her." Camilla hesitated, and in that silence I saw the true depth of her soul. "If he's in the way, then it's a tragedy. A double tragedy. The grieving mother plays well for the press." I almost dropped the phone. She was willing to kill her own son, my grandson. The monster wasn't just hiding. She was standing there in the moonlight, planning the unthinkable. "Tomorrow," Camilla said. "She's going to the coast tomorrow. Do it then. Push her." I ended the recording. My hands were shaking so violently I had to use both of them to slide the phone into my pocket. I retreated into the house, my heart pounding a rhythm of pure, cold fury. Fear had evaporated. All that was left was the icy clarity of a general going to war. The next morning was Sunday. The house was quiet. I dressed with precision, a black suit, sharp and authoritative. I put on my pearls. I applied my lipstick like war paint. I went downstairs. Camilla and Julian were at the breakfast table. Leo was watching cartoons in the living room. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice booming in the silent room. Camilla looked up, surprised by my attire. "Going somewhere, Eleanor? I thought we were going for a walk by the cliffs today." "Change of plans," I said, walking to the head of the table. I stood behind Julian, resting my hands on his shoulders. He flinched, sensing the tension radiating from me. "I've called a family meeting," I announced. Camilla laughed nervously. "A meeting? On a Sunday? Who's coming?" "Just us," I said. "And a few guests." At that moment, the front doors burst open. Elias walked in, followed by 4 uniformed police officers and the district attorney, a man I had known for 30 years. Camilla stood up, her chair scraping screechingly against the floor. "What is the meaning of this? Eleanor, have you lost your mind?" I walked over to the sideboard and picked up the remote for the wall-mounted television. Without a word, I pressed play. The audio from the garden filled the room. "Make it look like an accident. If he's in the way, then it's a tragedy." Camilla's face went white. She looked like a marble statue, frozen in horror. Julian stood up slowly, his eyes wide, looking from the television to his wife. "Camilla? That's your voice. What is this?" Camilla turned to him, desperation clawing at her features. "Julian, baby, it's fake! She's edited it! She's trying to tear us apart!" I motioned to the police. "Officer, if you would check the black sedan in the garage, I believe you'll find a rather interesting modification to the ignition system." Kaylin, who had been lurking in the hallway, tried to bolt for the back door. 2 officers tackled him before he made it 5 steps. Camilla looked around, realizing the walls were closing in. She looked at me, her eyes full of venom. "You old hag," she spat. "You should have just died. It was my turn." I stepped closer to her, invading her space. I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I saw her for what she was: small, greedy, and pathetic. "Your turn is over, Camilla. You wanted the Vance legacy? You wanted the money? You forgot the most important part of this family. We protect our own." I pointed to the living room, where an officer was gently standing near Leo, shielding him from the scene. "You were willing to sacrifice him," I said, my voice trembling with suppressed rage. "For that, I will spend every penny I have to ensure you never see the light of day again." As they cuffed her, she screamed and thrashed, a wild animal caught in a trap. Julian collapsed into his chair, sobbing, his head in his hands. He was a broken man, realized too late that he had been sleeping with the devil. I walked over to the living room. Leo looked up at me, his eyes wide and confused. "Is the bad lady going away?" he asked softly. "Yes, Leo," I said, kneeling down to hug him. "She's going away for a very long time." "Grandma, are we safe now?" I pulled back and looked him in the eyes. The same eyes that had saved my life. "We are safe, Leo, because we told the truth, because we looked out for each other." That night, the house felt empty, but for the first time in years, it felt clean. The rot had been cut out. Julian was in his room, sedated. I sat on the veranda with Leo, watching the fireflies dance in the garden. I thought about Arthur. I thought about the empire we built. For years, I thought the legacy was the ships, the warehouses, the bank accounts. I thought it was about power and endurance. But as I looked at Leo, sleeping peacefully with his head on my lap, I realized I had been wrong. The true legacy wasn't what we built in steel and stone. It was the ability to listen to the whisper of a child. It was the courage to face the ugly truth even when it broke your heart. It was the understanding that blood doesn't make a family, loyalty does. Love does. I stroked Leo's hair, listening to the crickets sing their ancient song. We had lost much. My son had lost his wife. Leo had lost his mother. I had lost the illusion of a happy retirement. But we had kept our lives. And more importantly, we had kept our souls intact. The world is full of people like Camilla, people who see others as obstacles to be removed, who value gold over breath. But as long as there are people like Leo, who are brave enough to whisper the truth in the dark, there is hope. I closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of the magnolias. The nightmare was over. The morning would come. And when it did, we would build something new, something stronger, brick by brick.